There are people in this world who feel more than others. They don't just hear words, they feel intentions. They don't just notice pain, they absorb it. These are the super empaths. They are often described as forgiving, understanding, endlessly compassionate, and because of that, people assume they can endure anything. But that assumption is wrong, because while super empaths can forgive many things, there is one emotional mistake that cuts so deeply. So fundamentally, that forgiveness doesn't come easily, if at all. And the tragedy is this: most people commit this mistake without ever realizing they've done it. Super empaths don't suffer because they are weak. They suffer because they are attuned. From a very early age, many learn to read emotional environments the way others read language. They learn to sense danger, tension, rejection, not as thoughts, but as feelings in the body. This sensitivity became their survival strategy. So when they love fully. When they trust deeply. And when they show up emotionally, they bring their entire nervous system with them. What hurts them most is not conflict, not disagreement, not even betrayal in the traditional sense. What wounds them at the core is something far quieter and far more damaging. It is the moment when their emotional reality is dismissed, when their pain is minimized, when their inner experience is questioned, corrected, or ignored. To a super empath, this doesn't feel like a misunderstanding. It feels like erasure, because when someone denies what you feel, they are not just disagreeing with you, they are denying your existence as you experience it. And the body remembers that. Let's talk about that one emotional mistake: emotional invalidation. Not being seen, not being believed, not being taken seriously when they are vulnerable. Statements like, "You're too sensitive," "That didn't happen the way you think," "You're overreacting," "It wasn't that bad." These words may sound small, even harmless, but to a super empath they land as a profound emotional betrayal, because what they needed in that moment was not agreement, it was presence. And when presence is replaced with dismissal, something breaks. Once a super empath realizes that their inner world is unsafe to share with you, they don't argue, they don't explode, they withdraw, and that withdrawal is often permanent. Here are the 6 things about WHY super empaths. Number 1 thing is, attacks their core identity. When a super empath's emotional experience is dismissed, it does not land as a simple disagreement. It lands as a threat to identity, because their sensitivity is not something they have, it is something they are. From early on, their nervous system learned to listen closely, to notice subtle shifts in tone, energy, silence, mood. This wasn't a preference, it was adaptation. Often, it was how they stayed safe, how they stayed connected, how they learned when to speak and when to disappear. So their emotional awareness became woven into their sense of self. It is the lens through which they understand the world and themselves within it. When someone says, "You're too sensitive," what the empath hears is not feedback. What the body hears is, there is something wrong with how you exist, and that cuts deeply, because to reject their sensitivity is to reject the very intelligence that helped them survive. It tells them that the part of them that learned to feel deeply, to attune, to respond with care, is inconvenient, excessive, or unwelcome. This creates a profound inner conflict. The empath is forced to choose between connection and authenticity, between belonging and self-trust. And many learned long ago that abandoning the self was the price of being loved. So when it happens again in adulthood, it doesn't feel like a single moment. It feels like a repetition of an old betrayal. Their body recognizes it instantly. The heart tightens, the breath shortens, something inside collapses. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a door closing. Because if the way they feel is not valid, then they are not valid. And no amount of reassurance after the fact can undo that message once it has landed. This is why they don't argue. Why they don't defend themselves endlessly. At some point they stop explaining. Not because they don't care, but because they finally do. They understand, often with sadness rather than anger, that being asked to doubt their own emotional reality is a request they can no longer fulfill, and so they step back. Not to punish, not to teach a lesson, but to protect the fragile, hard-won truth of who they are. Because a super empath can survive many things, but they cannot survive being told, directly or indirectly, that their way of being human is wrong. Number 2 is it reopens old survival wounds. When someone dismisses a super empath's feelings, it rarely stays in the present moment. It doesn't remain a single sentence, a single misunderstanding, a single careless reaction. It becomes a doorway. And through that doorway comes something much older, because many super empaths didn't become sensitive by chance. They became sensitive because at some point in childhood, sensitivity was a requirement for survival. Not survival in the dramatic sense, but in the quiet, everyday way a child learns to stay connected to the people they depend on. A child cannot afford emotional exile. A child cannot say, "This relationship is unhealthy, I'm leaving." A child must stay, and so the child adapts. They learn to monitor, to scan faces, to listen for tone, to notice the silence after a question, to sense when love is available and when it will be withdrawn. They become specialists in emotional weather because their safety depended on predicting storms. And often, the most painful part is not what happened, but what didn't happen, the comfort that didn't arrive, the apology that never came, the protection that wasn't offered, the reassurance that was too inconvenient for the adults around them. So they learned a devastating lesson early that their emotions were a problem, that their needs were too much, that their sadness, their fear, their anger, their confusion were not welcome. Sometimes it was overt. "You're being dramatic. Don't be so sensitive." Sometimes it was subtle. A sigh, look, a withdrawal. A parent who became colder when the child showed vulnerability. A caregiver who was overwhelmed, unpredictable, distracted, or emotionally absent. And the child, being intelligent, makes meaning out of this, not with words, but with the body. The body learns, if I feel, I lose connection. If I express pain, I become a burden. If I am fully myself, love becomes unsafe. Now imagine what happens when that child grows into an adult and finally, bravely, begins to open their heart to someone. They speak honestly, they show tenderness, they reveal something raw. They offer the truth of their inner world, not as a performance, but as an act of trust. And the response they get is dismissal. "Why are you making a big deal out of this? You're overreacting. That's not what I meant. You always take things the wrong way." In that moment, the adult may still be standing there, but the nervous system is not in adulthood anymore. The nervous system has time traveled. It goes back to being the child who learned that authenticity costs attachment. The child who had to swallow emotion to keep peace. The child who sensed that love was conditional. And that's why the reaction is so strong. People on the outside might say it was just a comment. But inside, it is not just anything. It is the reopening of a wound that never fully healed, the wound of being unseen, unheard, emotionally alone in the very places where love was supposed to live. And here is the heartbreaking part: the super empath doesn't only feel the current pain. They feel the accumulated pain, all the moments stacked on top of each other through the years. They feel the old helplessness, the old loneliness, the old humiliation of having to pretend they're fine when they're not, and the old fear that if they protest, if they demand emotional truth, they will be abandoned. So the body chooses a strategy. Sometimes it's people-pleasing. They apologize for having feelings. They explain too much. They soften their truth until it becomes acceptable. They shrink. They try to make their pain easier to digest. And sometimes, after a lifetime of doing that, the body chooses the other strategy. It shuts down, not as a punishment, but as protection. Because there comes a point where the empath realizes, I cannot keep reopening this wound to prove that it exists. They recognize that continually offering their vulnerability to someone who can't hold it is not love. It is self-harm disguised as loyalty, so they step back, not because they don't feel, but because they feel everything. And they finally understand that healing is not about enduring more. Healing is about no longer returning to the places that keep asking you to abandon yourself. Number 3 is they gave you access few ever get. When a super empath lets you in, it is not casual. People think openness is simply a personality trait, like some people are more talkative, more expressive, more emotionally fluent. But for many super empaths, vulnerability is not a default setting. It's a decision, and often it's a hard, one decision shaped by years of learning what happens when they reveal too much to people who don't know what to do with it. Because super empaths have usually discovered early in life that their emotional truth can be inconvenient to others, that their sensitivity can be misread as weakness. that their depth can make people uncomfortable. And so, without even fully realizing it, they develop a kind of inner gate. They become warm. They become kind. They become attentive. They become generous with care. But they don't become open. Not easily. They may give you their presence, their support, their laughter, their listening. They may show up for you again and again. But the deepest parts of them, the raw places, the tender memories, the truths they carry in silence, those parts are protected. Not because they are hiding, because they are guarding what has been mishandled before. So when a super empath finally shares something real with you, something that isn't polished or pleasing, something that doesn't come wrapped in a smile, understand what's happening. They are doing something their nervous system may still believe is dangerous. They are taking a risk. They are saying, without saying it, I'm letting you see what I usually keep private because I believe you are safe. That is access, and it is rare. The empath's deepest feelings are not just emotions. They are history. They are meaning. They are the child inside them still trying to find a place where they don't have to be alone with their pain. So when they reveal that pain to you, when they confess their fear, their hurt, their shame, their longing, they are not simply talking. They are placing something precious in your hands, and what breaks them is not that you don't fix it. They don't want fixing. What breaks them is when you handle it carelessly, when you minimize it, when you correct it, when you rush past it, when you make it about your intentions instead of their experience, when you treat their vulnerability like an inconvenience or a misunderstanding, because then the nervous system draws a conclusion, a very simple conclusion. It isn't safe here. And once that conclusion is formed, it changes everything. The empath might still stay in your life physically. They may still be polite, helpful, even affectionate, but something essential withdraws. The real access, the intimate access closes, not as a tactic, as a survival response. They don't slam the door. They don't announce it. They simply stop offering the part of themselves that needs tenderness. And from the outside, it can look confusing. You might think, they're still here. Why do they feel so far away? Or why are they acting cold all of a sudden? But it isn't coldness. It's grief. It's the grief of realizing that what they offered was too sacred to give again. Because a super empath knows something most people don't understand. Vulnerability is not endless. Trust is not an infinite resource. When they finally give you access to the places they normally protect, they are not giving you information. They are giving you their inner life. And if that inner life is dismissed, it doesn't just hurt. It teaches them a lesson they promised themselves they would never have to learn again. That closeness means danger. That being seen means being wounded. That honesty means abandonment. So the next time they are tempted to open up, they won't. They will smile, nod, and stay fine. They will keep things light. They will talk about anything except what's real. And that is the real loss. Because when a super empath stops sharing, it doesn't mean they have less to feel. It means they've decided you no longer get to witness it. Access, for them, is love, and losing access is not revenge, it's self-respect. Number 4 is their nervous system registers it as unsafe. When a super empath feels dismissed, something very important happens that most people never notice. It doesn't begin as a thought. It doesn't begin as an idea like, this person is bad, or this relationship is over. It begins in the body. Because long before we learn language, long before we learn logic, we learn safety through sensation. The nervous system is constantly asking one question, am I safe here? And it doesn't ask with words, it asks with tension, with breath, with heartbeat, with gut feeling, with the subtle impulse to move closer, or to pull away. Super empaths tend to have nervous systems that are highly receptive. Not because they are broken, but because they were trained, often by life, to become extremely aware. They pick up on micro signals, a shift in tone, a delay in response, a coldness behind a smile, a subtle impatience, emotional absence. So when they share something tender and receive dismissal, their nervous system doesn't interpret it as mistake. It interprets it as a danger signal. And here's the part people miss: danger doesn't always mean physical harm. For an empath, emotional rejection can feel like threat, because at some point, emotional rejection was threat. It meant isolation. It meant shame. It meant being alone with unbearable feelings. It meant love being withdrawn. It meant not belonging. So the body remembers. The body says, this is familiar, I've been here before. That's why their response can seem too intense for what happened, because they're not responding only to this moment. They are responding to what the moment represents in the language of the nervous system. You are not safe to be real with. Once the body decides that it does not matter how convincing the explanations are, the mind can produce endless reasons. The other person can say, I didn't mean it like that, or you misunderstood, or you're reading too much into it. But the body isn't debating intention. The body is tracking impact, and the impact is, when I revealed myself, I was emotionally left alone. That's the definition of unsafety for a sensitive system. So what does the nervous system do when it detects unsafety? It protects. Sometimes it protects by pleasing, by softening, apologizing, over-explaining, becoming smaller. The empath tries to repair connection quickly because the body is afraid of rupture. They don't want conflict, they want closeness. They want the threat to pass. But if this happens enough times, the nervous system learns a different protection: withdrawal. Not dramatic withdrawal, not I hate you, not even anger, a quiet retreat. They stop sharing, they stop reaching, they stop needing you. They start editing themselves before they speak. They swallow truths they would have once offered freely. They begin to treat the relationship as an unsafe environment, like walking through a room where you can't breathe normally, and you might not notice at first because they still function. They still show up, they still perform kindness, but internally something changes. Their heart is no longer resting. Their body is vigilant around you, and vigilance is exhausting. You can't be deeply connected to someone while your nervous system is bracing itself. That's not intimacy, that's survival. That's management. That's scanning for the next moment when your feelings will be inconvenient. So they begin to build distance, not as a strategy, but as a natural consequence of self-protection. And here's why it becomes so hard to repair once it happens. Because the nervous system does not trust words in the way the mind does. Words can be beautiful and still unsafe. Words can promise and still disappear. Words can apologize and still repeat the same pattern next week. The nervous system trusts consistency, presence, and emotional responsibility. It trusts a felt sense: when I am vulnerable, I am met, not corrected. When I am hurting, I am held, not debated. When I speak, I am not punished for having feelings. If that isn't present, the body won't relax. And if the body can't relax, the empath can't open. And if they can't open, the relationship becomes a place where they must protect themselves. So when a super empath says, I don't feel safe with you, they're often not accusing you of being dangerous in some dramatic way. They're saying something much more precise. They're saying, my body has learned that being emotionally real here leads to pain. And once the body learns that lesson, it will do what it was designed to do. It will keep them alive, even if it means losing you. Number 5 thing is, they value emotional truth over comfort. A super empath will often tolerate discomfort far more than most people realize. They can sit with silence. They can hold grief. They can stay present with difficult conversations. They can feel pain without immediately trying to escape it. They have spent much of their life learning how to carry emotional weight. So the assumption that they want everything to be nice is a misunderstanding. What they want is what is real. For them, emotional truth is not a preference. It is a necessity. It's the difference between being connected and being alone. It's the difference between intimacy and performance. They are not looking for a relationship that is smooth. They are looking for a relationship that is honest. Comfort, to many people, means avoiding tension, keeping things light, not rocking the boat, saying the right words, maintaining a sense of normal. But the super empath doesn't experience that as comfort. They experience that as a kind of emotional fog, as a subtle dishonesty, as living in a room where the air feels strange, but everyone is pretending it's fine. And because they can sense what others deny, that kind of comfort becomes exhausting for them. They can feel when someone is smiling while withholding. They can hear when I'm fine is not fine. They can sense when kindness is used as a cover for avoidance. They can feel when peace is not peace but suppression. So when they raise an issue, it's rarely because they want drama. It's because they want clarity. They want to name what is already there, so it doesn't rot in silence. The empath would rather have a difficult truth than a convenient lie. Because a lie, even a polite one, forces them to abandon their own perception. It requires them to pretend not to notice what they clearly feel. And for someone who has spent their life doing that to survive, there comes a point when they refuse. They've learned, often painfully, that comfort built on denial is not safety. It's just temporary anesthesia. It numbs the tension for a moment, but the underlying wound remains untouched. And eventually it grows. This is why super empaths often become too intense for people who are committed to emotional comfort. Not because they are trying to pressure anyone, but because they are unwilling to live in emotional half-truths. They don't want a relationship where conflict is avoided at the cost of authenticity. They don't need perfection. They don't demand flawless behavior, but they do need emotional responsibility. They need someone who can say, yes, I see it. Yes, I feel it too. Yes, I may not like it, but I won't deny it, because truth for the empath is calming, even if it's painful. A hard truth gives the nervous system something solid. It gives it reality. It gives it a ground to stand on. But comfort that denies truth feels like quicksand. When someone chooses comfort over emotional truth, the empath doesn't just feel disappointed, they feel unsafe. Because comfort often means one person is protecting their image, their ego, or their sense of control, while the empath is left holding the emotional consequences alone. And that loneliness is what they cannot tolerate. If you say, let's just move on, while something inside them is still aching, you're asking them to abandon their internal reality. If you say, why can't you let it go? While the wound has never been acknowledged, you're asking them to amputate a part of themselves for the sake of peace. If you say, you're making it bigger than it is, you're not reducing pain, you're isolating them inside it. Because for the empath, healing doesn't happen by skipping discomfort. Healing happens by meeting discomfort with honesty and care. They don't want to stay stuck in pain. They want to move through it. But moving through requires presence. It requires truth. It requires the willingness to stay with what's real long enough for it to soften. And here is the deeper reason this matters so much to them. Many super empaths have spent years in relationships where comfort was demanded at their expense, where harmony meant their silence, where being easy to love meant not having needs, where expressing hurt meant being labeled difficult. So when they finally choose emotional truth, it's not just a relationship preference. It's an act of liberation. It's them reclaiming the right to exist without editing themselves into something more convenient. And that's why when they meet someone who chooses comfort, who avoids, denies, minimizes, or deflects, they don't just feel frustrated, they feel grief, because they can sense very early that the relationship will require them to go back into the old role, the one who carries the emotional honesty alone, the one who feels too much, the one who has to swallow what's real so the other person can stay comfortable. And they have done that before. They know where it leads, so they stop. And not because they don't love, but because they will not betray themselves again. For a super empath, emotional truth is not about being right. It's about being real. And being real is the only place their heart can breathe. Last thing is that once trust is lost, it rarely returns. They may remain kind. They may remain polite. But the intimacy is gone quietly, completely. When trust breaks for a super empath, it rarely breaks in a single dramatic moment. It breaks the way a thread wears out, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until one day it snaps and you can't quite understand why it won't hold anymore. Because for them, trust is not an idea, it's a felt sense. It's the body's willingness to relax in your presence. It's the heart's permission to be unguarded. It's the nervous system saying, I can be real here and still be loved. And that kind of trust is not built by grand gestures. It's built in small moments. How you respond when they are vulnerable, how you handle their tears, how you meet their honesty, how you stay present when something is uncomfortable. It's built when you show again and again that their inner world won't be mocked, minimized, or used against them. So when it's lost, it isn't simply hurt feelings. It's a collapse of safety. Many super empaths have a history of trying harder when things feel unsafe. They over-explain. They over-empathize. They give more. They take responsibility for moods that aren't theirs. They bend, they soften. They become smaller to keep connection alive. They learned that losing connection felt like danger, so they became skilled at preventing rupture. sometimes at the cost of their own truth. But there comes a point where the body stops cooperating with that strategy. At some point, the empath realizes, not intellectually but viscerally, I keep paying for closeness with self-abandonment, and the body eventually refuses. This is why, when trust is finally lost, it can look sudden. They may have tolerated and forgiven 100 small dismissals, 100 missed moments, 100 times they didn't feel met. They may have stayed quiet about it. They may have even convinced themselves it wasn't that bad. But the body was keeping score, and the score is not kept with blame, it's kept with tension, a little more guardedness each time, a little less openness, a little more hesitation before speaking, a little more distance in their eyes, a little more fatigue after being with you, until one day the empath feels something very simple: I can't do this anymore. Not because they don't care, but because caring has started to hurt them. And then comes the most misunderstood part. When they withdraw, they often don't do it with cruelty. They don't shout. They don't punish. They may even remain warm. They may still check on you. They may still be kind. But the trust is gone, because the trust was never about whether you are a good person. It was about whether they feel emotionally safe with you. And once the nervous system decides you are unsafe, it doesn't easily reverse that decision. Not because the empath is stubborn, but because the nervous system's job is protection. It's not interested in second chances if second chances have historically led to the same pain. That's why apologies, though meaningful, often aren't enough. An apology can acknowledge what happened, but what the empath needs is evidence that something has changed. They need consistency. They need emotional responsibility. They need a new pattern repeated long enough that the body can begin to soften again. And if that doesn't happen, if the apology is followed by the same dismissal, the same defensiveness, the same minimization, then the empath system closes the file, quietly, permanently. This is where people get confused. They say, but I said sorry, or I didn't mean it, or why can't you just move on? But the empath is not refusing to move on. They are refusing to move back. They know what it costs them to trust. They know the vulnerability it requires. They know the exposure. They know what it's like to feel deeply and then feel alone with it. And once they've experienced that with someone, their system becomes very careful about offering access again, because trust for them is sacred. And sacred things are not repeatedly handed to people who don't treat them with care. So when trust is lost, what you are often seeing is not punishment. It is grief. It is acceptance. It is the empath acknowledging something painful, that the connection they hoped for cannot exist in the way they need it to exist. And it's important to understand they don't stop loving easily. That's not the issue. They stop risking themselves. They stop placing their inner world into hands that have proven, even unintentionally, that they don't know how to hold it. They may still smile. They may still be polite. They may even still wish you well. But the part of them that once leaned in, that once opened, softened, trusted, has stepped back. Not to teach you a lesson, to finally protect what had been unprotected for too long. And when you ask why it rarely returns, the answer is simple. And it's heartbreaking, because rebuilding trust would require them to become vulnerable again in the same place they were wounded. And the body remembers too clearly what that felt like. So they choose peace over possibility, safety over hope, and self-respect over longing. Not because they don't forgive, but because they finally understand that forgiveness is not the same as re-entry. They can forgive what happened. They just can't go back to being unguarded with someone their nervous system has learned not to trust. If a super empath walks away from you, it's rarely because of one argument. It's because over time they realized they were being asked to doubt their own emotional reality just to maintain connection. And no relationship is worth that cost. The deepest healing for a super empath doesn't come from being fixed, corrected, or explained. It comes from hearing one simple sentence: I believe you. Your feelings make sense.